Welcome to the Southwest Food Hub latest event, Development Goals and Food Procurement. And we're going to knit that together neatly for you over the course of the next hour. Just before we start, should let you know that we are going to record this event so that people who don't get to join today can watch it in future on the Southwest Food Hub website. So if you don't want to be seen, please shut your cameras off now. As Ellen's encouraging you to, please put your names into the chat. And also we'll use the chat for questions throughout the presentations. We will try to answer as many questions as we can today, but as with events in the past, we will follow up with the questions outside of this event if we don't get to them. Finally, so the aim of today is to link the Sustainable Development Goals to procurement, which, you know, I think if we were talking about this maybe 10 or 15 years ago, would have been a mile apart. But I think today, very much they're knitted together, as I say, and an integrated part of responsible procurement for the future. So we've got some brilliant speakers. I will shortly introduce to you Claire Herbert-Golden from Bristol City Council, and Claire will talk to you about the living wage activity around Bristol. Vicki Herb will then join us from Sustain, and she'll continue that discussion about living wage, but also focus in a little bit on modern slavery in procurement. We've then got Sarah Hargreaves joining us from Resource Futures, and then finally Sian Cabrera will talk to us about the Growth Hub as part of the West of England Combined Authority, and WECA have been very supportive of the Southwest Food Hub and actually supporting today's event. So we look forward to that later, and then we'll wrap up. So I think I've covered all of my housekeeping, and then they'll soon let me know if I haven't. So without further ado, and just before we get on with things, what we do is we'd like to know who you are. So we're just going to run a poll, and don't think too long about it, but please just let us know where you're from. Just give that a few more seconds. Okay. Okay, I think that will do. Thanks, Alan. If we take the poll down. Off my screen anyway. Okay, so just before we get on with the main crux of the presentations and listen to our excellent speakers, just wanted to give a bit of background for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Southwest Food Hub, hopefully not many of you, and then for those of you who are familiar with us, just maybe a little bit of an update. So I'm just going to share some slides with you, hopefully successfully. Here we go. Okay, so yes, Southwest Food Hub established in May of last year, brought together by myself and Glenn Woodcock, ably supported by Ellen Bright, who's coordinating the event today. And from our website, you can look at our advisory board, but our objective really is to support this sort of unique opportunity for procurement across the country, not just in the Southwest, to access more public sector opportunities. We're focused on the Southwest. Our goal is working with Crown Commercial Services, who procurement body for government, to introduce a new way of procurement, new form of procurement using a technology platform, using modern IT systems, which should open up more procurement opportunities for both shorter supply chains and, importantly to today, to a more diverse supply group, which will enable us to very much align ourselves with the future requirements and the future responsibilities in procurement. So I think, you know, that's very key to have top of mind, is through technology we can allow buyers to make more responsible decisions about how they buy, and we can incentivize and bring to the fore suppliers who are working really hard to be as compliant and as sustainable as they possibly can be in the way they work. Just to touch briefly on the Crown Commercial Services Future Food Framework, never easy to say, but I'm getting used to it. Timelines, you know, and obviously we've all experienced delay in the world of COVID, but what's brilliant is now things are back on track. There's a time scale committed to, which is in the public domain. And basically, you know, very important over the next sort of 4 to 6 months that the core suppliers are brought on board, and then that'll enable us hopefully by this time next year to be talking about a live procurement system. And remember, that's only the start. You know, the objective here is to open a system that is fit for the future. And once it's open, we've got to make sure there's sufficient suppliers and buyers ready. But then, you know, this will run forever. So we'll continue to support that as it rolls out across the region. And then, of course, the idea is that they learn all of the challenges that we face and tune things before the same system is rolled out nationally. And we look forward to helping with that as well. So exciting times ahead. I think just to sort of reinforce that is, you know, there's been significant over the last 2 months, significant increased profile around public sector procurement, highlighting the opportunity that it presents for suppliers of all sizes and the ambition of government really to open up more opportunities for small and medium-sized businesses particularly. We've had some fantastic support from the NFU, who sit on our advisory board. They're just about through their membership to launch a significant piece of research that will really uncover what the supply and demand dynamics are throughout the region. You may have seen a few weeks ago, public sector procurement was featured on Countryfile, and whilst at first it was a bit of a pop at not doing good enough job, actually I think there was a larger amount of optimism about how this can be a real sort of carrot in a world of stick that we see in the agri sector at the moment through all the changes that we're experiencing, not just through to COVID, but through Brexit and through some of the potential and looming international trade deals that might come about. So this is an opportunity amongst a load of challenges that are currently put upon the sector. And then just, you might well see it, if not, if seen it, it's on the South West Food Hub website, but is the outcomes from and the outputs and the actions from the recent EFRA review of public sector procurement, of which we were proud and privileged to contribute towards, which really, I think, give a great to-do list for how we ought to really embrace change in the future and all be part of making sure that we make the most of what's available to us in the UK in terms of food and drink, because I think if we don't use it, we'll lose it, is my overall personal opinion. So I didn't plan to take up much more time today, but just I think putting into perspective how we fit into the puzzle that is this future food framework. I think this just illustrates it is very much Crown Commercial Services own the future food framework. They will procure the technology platform and facilitate the trading between suppliers and buyers. DEFRA, on the other side, they're currently reviewing the government buying standards for food and the balanced scorecard, and they will really set the rules, is my simple terminology there, is they will set the standards that are required in order to supply into the public sector, so suppliers are really clear about what they need to do to meet the opportunity, which are not going to be lots of new rules, but what you might see coming over time is more benchmarks around sustainability and responsible supplying. And then we sit in the middle, so our goal really is to make sure that people understand what it means by shortening supply chains, how the technology will work, and how it is a great opportunity for everyone, and particularly working with procurers to help them to understand that actually this is a different way. This is a way in which you can decide what your strategy might be around food procurement for public sector, and it may well be driven by geography or food standards or sympathetic to the countryside, but you can set the standards, and then we'll take the challenge on to make sure that the supply base is tuned in with that, and those options become available to you through this dynamic purchasing system. So lots more information about the South West Food Hub available through our website, but I think that's enough from me. I hear people cry. So without further ado, I'd like to move on to introduce the first of today's speakers. Claire Herbert-Golden has expensive, I don't know how much she's paid, but has extensive experience in the public sector policy and has been involved in strategic development and programme delivery for a long time. She's an expert in her field. And I'd like to hand over to Claire, who's going to talk to you about the living wage.
Oh, hello. Thank you very much, Greg. That's a nice introduction. Hello, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here to talk to you today from Bristol Living Wage City Initiative. I'll screen share now straight away and talk you through. I'm going to talk about the living wage, We have a big initiative about it in Bristol and the surrounding area, where we're encouraging employers to sign up to become a living wage employer. And I'll talk you through why that's a very valuable thing to do for your bottom line, for your marketing. As well as from the city's point of view, we're interested in it as part of our building back better and inclusion work and strengthening our local economy, as well as tackling in-work poverty, which sadly is quite a big issue. I'm not going to talk about the sort of poverty-related issues today. I'm going to talk to you about the business-related issues and the living wage, and why it's a very valuable thing to do in terms of your marketing offer, especially if you're working with the public sector and large employers. So bear with me while I screen share and get the PowerPoint up. It's always slightly nerve-wracking. There we are. Right, so I only have a few slides. I'm just going to talk for a few minutes, and then if anybody has any questions, or if you want me to talk about another aspect, then I can do that as well. So as I say, I'm from making Bristol a living wage city. It's a city-led initiative with major stakeholders and employers across the city of Bristol. We're the largest living wage city in the UK. There are only a few others. Cardiff was one of the first, and Salford in Manchester. I know London's very interested, and there are 7,000 or 8,000, nearly 8,000 living wage employers in the UK already. And this year's the 20th anniversary of the living wage as a standard. So in Bristol, we have a one city approach. You may have heard of if you're here from the southwest. And we have sort of city boards. We have a health and wellbeing board, an economy board, sustainability. And so the Living Wage City Initiative is not just a city council initiative. It relates to the one city boards, and that they have 90 members from across some of the biggest and smallest employers in the city, including third sector and charities. So the Living Wage Foundation, which you can see the logo for in the middle here, that's the Living Wage Foundation. They're the organisation that sets this standard. And the standard at the moment is £9.50 an hour if you're outside London. If you're inside London, it's £10.85 per hour. And that is set, the way it's set is it's the Resolution Foundation, which is a think tank. It does an analysis each year of how much does it actually cost basically to live. And then it sets the living wage in relation to the cost of living, which is why it's very good. It's a very good standard if you want to employ your staff and pay them a very good quality basic wage. It's slightly higher than the national living wage, which I'll come back to in a moment. So this is a map taken from the Living Wage Foundation's website. They have a great website with loads on it, very easy to navigate. So if you were just to search for Living Wage Foundation, it would take you, and you can look at how many employers there are, and it lists them, but it also maps them like this. You can look up different regions, different sectors of industry, public and private sector, see what organisations there are around. So on this map here, you can see that in the southwest, we've got hundreds of living wage accredited employers already. We've got around 600 in the Bristol and West of England area, but right down in Cornwall, you've got 118, and you've got if you go on the Living Wage Foundation, you can zoom in and get a bit closer in. This slide shows the difference between the minimum wage, the national living wage, and the real living wage. So the first two in the orange and the green stripes, they're the government set standards, and they're not set in relation so much to the cost of living. They're more set in relation to average pay levels across the country. So the government is aiming to make sure that the poorest, least well paid people are at least paid a certain proportion of the average salary. But you can see that the real living wage, which, as I said earlier, is related to the cost of living more closely, is higher. And also it's paid to everybody who's aged over 18, other than apprentices. So it doesn't cover apprentices. It covers your staff that you employ directly yourself. and any contracted staff that you have on your premises regularly. So for example, if you have cleaners, caterers, grounds maintenance staff who work regularly on your premises, then they would also be covered. But to become accredited, you don't have to have it all sorted out all in one go. To become accredited, you contact the Living Wage Foundation. They have a form you can fill in on their website, and they'll have a conversation with you and talk you through it. It's free to get to talk to them about it, basically, if you pay all your staff the living wage already, which is, as I say, is £9.50 outside London, then you can become accredited very simply. And then if you've got contracted staff, you'll talk to the living wage about how soon can you bring those contracts in line. So perhaps you'll be refreshing your cleaning contract in a year's time. That would be fine. You'd still be able to get accredited this year. And there's quite a lot of promotion going on around the living wage this year, with it being the 20th anniversary nationally of the standard existing. So as I say, the advantage to your employees is that you're paying them a very clear standard. You're paying them £9.50 for everybody aged 18 and above, whereas the government national wage, you don't get the living wage nationally unless you're 23, which is £8.91. If you're under 23, then you're paid £8.36 if you're 21 and over, and it's less if you're a bit younger. So that's the standard. So the Living Wage Foundation have worked on this for 20 years, and they've done research, especially in recent years, found out what the bottom line business benefits are. In recent research that they did, they found that 86% of businesses they surveyed said that it really enhanced their reputation, and 64% said it helped with their product and services differentiation in the marketplace. So it's a good marketing tool. It also affects your bottom line. It reduces your bottom line costs in relation to HR and recruitment, sick leave and turnover. 75% of businesses said that it helped their retention processes, and 58% said that it really supported staff interaction. It tends to, when we talk to people, individual businesses, they feedback that it's really helped staff morale. There was a great talk done at the Living Wage Week a couple of years ago by the Volunteer Tavern in Bristol, and they'd become a living wage employer, and they said since they had become a living wage employer, they hadn't lost any staff over the last 18 months. All their staff had stayed, whereas as some of you may know, in the hospitality and pub industry, there's usually quite a high turnover, and they were saying it's just great. It's really added to the atmosphere in the place. The staff were bringing their friends and family in and having meals, so it was a really lovely thing to be doing, and it really shows to your staff that you are interested in their well-being. But it also really helps with your marketing. So as I was saying, there are nearly 8,000 employers who are living wage accredited already. Now that means that they're very interested in contracting with other living wage organisations. And in the food sector, this talk, I know this session today is about working with the Crown Estates and public sector. And you'll find that a lot of public sector, local authority organisations, central government, but also education, university, hospitals, they're all, as you'll probably know if you're working with them already, they're very interested in social value as part of their procurement processes. It's not all about the bottom line. And when they look for contractors, they look for evidence that you're a good employer, that you treat your staff well, that you have certain good quality standards for employment, that you're paying attention to equalities, diversity and inclusion. And sometimes you even get up to 10% social value benefit as a competitive edge when you're bidding for contracts in the public sector. So it's very worthwhile in terms of your marketing and working in the procurement field. This is another screenshot from the Living Wage Foundation, which just shows a few, just on this one page, it's the page that shows Bristol City Council. But there's, you can go onto the Living Wage website and scroll through all the living wage employers in the Southwest or nationally. And you can see they include you know, huge, very big names, not only the local authorities, but big companies like Burgess Salmon, for example, and very small places like Happy City. So it's a really wide mix of companies that procure using social value standards, including the living wage. This one is, I'm just going to touch on this one. This is showing the Living Wage City Initiative in Bristol. And if you're based in Bristol and the surrounding area, including the West of England combined authority areas, you might be interested in getting in touch, and you're very welcome to come along to meetings. We have them every 2 months as an action group where we work together on how we can promote the living wage. And in November, we have a living wage event. Last November, we had a living wage event across Bristol and the Southwest. We had a fantastic talk from a caravan from Mother Ivy's Bay in Cornwall, who spoke about how fantastic it's been to become a living wage accredited employer, and how it's so interested in it that he was, even when he was renewing his caravans, he was saying to his suppliers, although this isn't technically required of a living wage accredited employer, he went out to the market for new static caravans and insisted that the people that would get the contract would be the first company to become a living wage accredited caravan maker, which I thought was really interesting. So anyway, everybody's welcome. We'll be having another event this November. So if you get in touch with me, either directly at Bristol City Council or via Ellen, if she doesn't mind passing any contacts on, or through the Living Wage Foundation, then I'll send you out an invitation to our November event this year. This year, I think we'll probably, I don't know for definite, but we'll probably be having UE speaking because they became accredited recently. And as you know, they're a huge contractor. University of Bristol spoke the year before. This is just another slot showing the sorts of sectors that we're working in, the Living Wage City, and we're going to be having meetings with all these different sectors. So again, if you're interested in coming, talking informally with me about how to become a living wage accredited employer, please get in touch after the meeting. We have targets to bring another 16,000 staff into living wage accredited organisations by the end of next year, and to increase our living wage employers locally by 156 at least. So actually that's the end of my talk there. I won't go on. I've got other slides to show if there were questions, but that'll do for now, I think. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks Claire. That's great. If you can just stop sharing there a minute, and if I could, I'd like to hog the mic and maybe pose a question or two to you, just whilst others are thinking about them. Is £9.50 enough? What's your view?
Well, that's a very good question. And one of the partners on our action group for Bristol Living Wage City is the TUC. And so we're strongly connected with the unions. And Nigel Costley, who some of you may know, he's the Southwest TUC lead. And he's on our economy board, on the One City Economy Board in Bristol as well. And then his colleague comes to the living wage action groups. And so I do know that some unions, want to have a higher level of pay, and we're certainly not saying that you should pay the minimum. We're saying we want to raise people up to at least this minimum. We're suggesting going a step further than the government's minimum. And I would fully, accept that if you pay staff more, that's even better. Obviously, you need to pay them commensurate with their skills and experience as well.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And I'm sorry I hogged the question, so I'm going to have to sort of leave it there if you don't mind, and we'll perhaps follow up with some questions afterwards. I've got a few more, but Vicki, I'm going to now introduce our next speaker. So we've got Vicki Hurd, who's here from Sustain. Vicki is an expert in strategic policy and development, and she also sits on the National Advisory Board for Dynamic Food Procurement, like myself. So she's been very much part of this public sector opportunity that we're trying to evolve for a long period of time now. So I'd like to hand over to Vicki.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, great. I'll just share my screen. So yes, I'm Vicki Heard, Head of Farming and Supply Chains. Actually, I should probably add that at Sustain, which is an alliance of over 100 organisations all concerned with better farm and food policy and practice. I work on the farm policy, transition to climate, nature-friendly farming, agroecology, a green recovery, so good, just transition to a green recovery post-COVID, and as climate kicks in, we really need a Green New Deal that's based on just transition. I work on supply chains infrastructure, which is very important. We shouldn't just talk about the farm end of the picture, so I will touch on that. And innovative finance, so it's about government support, but also impact investors, other sorts of finance that could and should be available to drive change in the food system. We have a network of partnerships across the UK. We co-run with Soil Association and Food Matters, which is a fantastic movement building. If you in your if you're working in a local authority, if you're not connected with the Food Places network in your area, then do get in touch. It's a really valuable opportunity to show the systemic changes and work together to solve any of the problems in a systemic way rather than piecemeal one by one. We've also got a peri-urban food project which kicked off with its first big meeting in Bristol, so I'm just mentioning that. But loads of different projects that are relevant to a lot of this, but I'm here to talk today about workers and people in the food system. And I would say, just to start off, that our position is that if a system can't pay the living wage, as was discussed by Claire, then it's really not a system which should be investing in, using, supporting, buying from. And that goes for anybody, you know, from the individual consumer to the big procurement purchases. And that's what we're aiming for, so that everybody within the food system that supplies to anybody is able to earn the living wage. And that's a huge ask. But without that ambition, we're really potentially making some parts of the system better, like making it greener, tackling climate change, or tackling health, but without actually tackling what is one of the fundamental rights under the SDGs, under any rights, should be to earn a wage that allows you to live a good life and good welfare for you and your family. And we know that in the food sector, we have low wages, poor conditions, and they're family unfriendly. And that's been the case for a long time. And it's gotten worse. I work with the Unite and Unison, they're members of Sustain, and we know that it's a continuous problem, and there's continuously poor access to justice in the food system. And that's to do with a lot of factors. One of the biggest ones is the fact that we pay so little for food. And there's many factors around that. Partly it's been driven by big corporate global agenda to make money through driving very much a low price system, but also by other things, the fact that people can't afford more food because housing costs are so high, etc., etc. But we want that to change, but we see it as part of a whole system. We've done various reports, which I've put here, trying to drive change, trying to get legal changes in the Agricultural Act, for instance, and to have better enforcement through the bodies which enforce employment law. The Gangmasters Authority has changed, is doing lots about modern slavery, exposing that, acting on it, supporting those that find themselves in modern slavery in the UK, and it's often in food. But there is the everyday misery for people. It's not modern slavery, but it's everyday misery of low wages, poor conditions, and that's a really strong element of our food system, where 1 in 7 people in the UK are employed in the food system. It's a big employer, really needs to do better to make well-being for everybody a norm. So as I said, there's modern slavery and abusive supply chains. This is one of the areas which I worked on for many years. One of my successes has been, with many others, to get a grocery code adjudicator to apply a code of practice to stop abuse in the supply chain by the big 12 multiple retailers. And that's a big issue because it only applies to the big 12 retailers buying from a direct provider. So that isn't really relevant if you're a procurement officer buying from a supply chain, because those supply chains aren't covered. There might be some crossover, but the reality is the grocery code adjudicator only applies to the top 12 big retailers. It's great that we've got it, and it's changing some of their practices, but it's not enough. I'm never happy. We're never happy. We need much stronger application of the code and use of ability to fine, so that retailers know that they can't carry on doing this. But one of the other areas which they have a big impact is with the very prevalent just-in-time centralized distribution systems, which drives the need to have workers available any time of the day to pick, so they can deliver all through the day, 24 hours, 7 days a week. And that leads to abuse of workers. And that's the just-in-time system, which is really embedded in the system. And I'll tell you what I think we need to do to change that. But in terms of procurement, there's possibly less drive in that sense, because the procurement sector can change in that respect. They don't have the kind of retail full shelves kind of agenda, but there are other ways in which procurement can be worse. So what I'm saying is we could have more and better jobs in the food system, and that for me is about getting value, reaching the workers, reaching the farmers so they can pay the workers, reaching the SMEs that are processing the food in abattoir or in food processing, making sandwiches, etc., etc. So we need to have the value reaching there so it can actually pay the workers and allow good conditions. As I've mentioned, got regulation of grocery actions, but beyond the Grocery Code Adjudicator, we need fair dealing rules, which we managed to get in the Agricultural Act, which became law last year. But now we need a timetable for rolling them out to actually apply a statutory code for every sector. So dairy, beef, horticulture, etc., so that there is abuse being tackled with fining, with ability to fine companies abusing, but driving good practice in the supply chain beyond the big retailers. And that will affect procurement, and it will put in more costs. And that's why that's important. But we should be paying more for food, but we should have the budgets to pay for that food. That's critical. I mean, I know most local authorities are struggling. Austerity for many, many years, budget squeezed, got to get best value. But for us, the value has to be in good conditions as well as environmental value. What we're doing is looking at whether we can have new routes to market that allow farmers and growers to pay living wage. And that's where the dynamic procurement is a fantastic one and I'm really pleased to hear from Greg how it's going live next year, because that's being seen as a real opportunity for SMEs, small producers, to get access to a market that can pay regularly and decently, so they can pay their workers and do farming that is good for the environment and for everybody overall. That's absolutely critical, and it would be great if we can get SMEs able to do that so they can find new routes to market. And we need a Green New Deal and green recovery from COVID that is focused on food. It's amazing how often food and land-based sectors are ignored when it comes to green recovery. It's all about energy. We need food to be in there, so we're doing a lot of work on that. Would just mention, I haven't got time to talk about it, but this farmer-focused routes to market piece of work that NEF, New Economics Foundation, Growing Communities and Soil Association have done, really analyses the social and economic and environmental benefits of a new route to market, a different way of doing it that's out with the current systems, where there's shorter supply chains. People can, farmers can really get regular good pay for what they're doing. So all are paid the living wage. And that's one of the values that Growing Communities applies to its work, absolutely from the beginning. So it's really exciting to see, and I really recommend reading that report. So just to finish off, how procurement can help. We need to apply the social values in the food supply. I know, as I said, it's very difficult with budgets, but the Public Services Social Value Act does allow for that, and it'd be interesting to explore that in the questions. Buying from living wage companies where possible, as Claire talked about, critical, and to drive the use of the living wage accreditation across the food sector. There is some great food in London, great food companies doing living wage and being accredited, but we need obviously far more. Get transparency so you can see and promote where your money is making a difference in the food chain. That's one of the other elements of the Agriculture Act which we need to push for, but it's, we need transparency there. And ideally use local suppliers, explore dynamic procurement model, and hopefully we'll have bodies all across the UK once the dynamic procurement rolls out across the UK, which would be fantastic. And that will provide SMEs, small farmers, an opportunity to access those better contracts. And ideally, this is all about stopping leaking economies. and leaky environments by keeping money flow locally so it can protect wages and protect the soil, air, water and everything, which I haven't got time to talk about, but which obviously Sustain really cares about. And it's all part of, for us, the same systemic problems that need solutions. So I've done that very, very quickly. I hope that's okay, and have a look at our website. And we have just done a report putting good food jobs at the heart of economic recovery in order to try and drive a discussion around food as part of the Green New Deal. Thank you, Greg.
Brilliant, Vicki, and you can feel the passion and the tremendous hard work that Sustain go through to try and balance this up in the future. And it's so tricky. You know, what we're saying on one hand is we need to pay more, because we do. But on the other hand, we need to make sure that we don't outprice ourselves versus international imports. We already import too much food. And if we continue with that, we'll have a food security issue. So Sustain, brilliant work, and we encourage everybody to look at how we can balance that up. But I'm under strict orders to move on. Ellen's beating me with a stick, and I need to introduce our next speaker. So I hope we've got some time for some more questions later. So we've got Sarah Hargreaves, who's from Resource Futures. Resource Futures is an employee-owned, not-for-profit and B Corp certified organisation. We're going through B Corp certification with another hat on, and if you in getting through that, as we would say in Devon, that makes you a proper business. So I will hand over to Sarah.
Hi everyone. Sorry about that. Can you all hear me? All good. I'm obviously from Resource Futures. We are a sustainability consultancy based in Bristol. And as Greg said, we have quite a lot of, let me just move down. We have a 30-year heritage in the sustainability sector, and our vision is to create a sustainable world. So we try to lead by example by, we are a B Corp, and we have been a B Corp since 2016. We are a living wage employer, and we have been that for a long time, although we only got the accreditation more recently. And we're also an employee-owned organisation, so we try and live our ethics as much as possible. We came from a community action base many years ago, where we looked at forming the community action group model, which is all about how to change behaviours and increase sustainability through grassroots action. Obviously, as our work has expanded, we now look at a whole different range of areas, and that consumption piece falls into all the different work streams that we look at. So that includes the behaviour change and the levers to help people understand their relationship with products and resources and how we can help improve that. The evidence gathering, so what are people throwing away at the moment? How can we then use those as levers to increase their sustainable behaviours? And the waste service optimization, to understand how can we better collect the materials people are discarding and improve the recycling and the reuse around that. And obviously circular models are really critical here. And it's really good that we see a continued commitment from local authorities around the consumption reduction piece through community action. So our community action group network in Devon is supported by Devon County Council, and that's been running for about 4 years now, and our Real Nappy project is supported by Gloucester County Council, which has been running for many years. And we're now working with Worcestershire County Council, again looking at minimisation, so including food. So one of the question is, why is responsible consumption so important around food? Because food, you can recycle it and it's turned into wonderful digestate and energy and power vehicles. So what is the purpose to reduce that consumption piece? We all know about the waste hierarchy, but it's been an interesting piece of work in Bristol. We've been going through our sustainable food place accreditation recently, looking for a gold standard. And alongside that, we were working with an urban living lab who were investigating this piece around resource consumption and recycling. And the, sorry, I've realized I've not been clicking my slides. The results of that are really fascinating. So they found that by preventing the food waste.
Sorry, Sarah, sorry, you need to share. You need to share your slides, I think.
Oh, I'm not sharing? Oh, man.
Come on, share it around.
Yeah, sorry, guys. Right.
It's been a good talk anyway.
Can you see that now?
Yes.
So I was just talking about the resource, why resource reducing consumption is so important. Sorry, I lost my train of thought now. And the Urban Living Lab found that preventing food waste is 3 times more effective when reducing water use than recycling. When you're looking at carbon, it's 60 times more effective to reduce the food waste in the first place than it is to recycle it. And when you're looking at marine eutrophication impacts, waste reduction is the only way to reduce it. So the food consumption piece and reducing that is super important. From a consumer point of view, they've been a really interesting journey recently where we started with the Blue Planet 2 and that wow impact around plastics, and everyone started to kind of engage in this area. And then we had the wonderful Greta, followed by the Extinction Rebellion movement, which really brought people connected to the climate agenda. But even up to this point, people still weren't connecting this to food. So people still felt that food packaging was a bigger issue than the food itself, and not linking the fact that food has a massive role to play in reducing climate impacts. Brexit came along, and that has a really interesting role because it started to make people wonder about, where does my food come from? And they started to see the stories about lorries might be queuing up, there could be shortages, there'll be price fluctuations, and people started to think about food. And then COVID, where we saw actual food shortages and people started connecting to their local food suppliers, and we started to see the increased community action. So I wanted to talk about resource consumption within communities and the role that communities can play in improving that agenda, and also about businesses and the role that businesses can play. And this is primarily driven by the work we've been doing in Bristol around going for gold, so achieving our gold sustainable food place accreditation, but also our wider work at Resource Reaches from the community action groups and the other initiatives that we get involved with. So community play a really interesting role. That grassroots action helps other people understand the impact of food waste, of food surplus, and the role that that's playing. A lot of people don't generally see it or feel that they don't see it. So to get people actually engaging with it helps ripple that up through into businesses, into retailers, and into the wider community. So the role of surplus food cafes and hubs, bringing food from retailers into a community setting, not only helps increase the education around the food surplus within that community and the people who are benefiting from the food and all their families, but equally it helps the retailers see how much food they're throwing away. We found when I worked with Food Cycle that retailers might give us crates and crates of melons, and they started to realize their procurement process was not right, and their decisions for purchasing were not correct. And so that the melons reduced, and we stopped getting so many melons, and we stopped getting so many eggs as they started to rethink their procurement patterns. So the community plays a really important role in filtering those messages around. And communities also provide this great opportunity to support local food producers, to get them started, to create more circular food models within that particular region. And the gleaning networks play a really interesting role here, working with the food growers and the farmers to collect the crops so they have no particular price value or too hard for them to collect. And again, pulling that back into the circular community model. So it goes into those community food projects, it goes into those community larders and fridges, and it helps feed people through surplus food cafes. So communities play a really important part in changing the way people purchase food, the way people identify with food. And the closer you can get people to connect to food, the more likely they are to buy it responsibly and waste less of it. The one other thing I wanted to touch on, though, was the role of community and cultural variations. Because food consumption varies across cultures, and we found in Bristol, through lockdown, as food parcels are being distributed, that they need to be appropriate to particular cultural groups. And if you don't understand who's living in your area, are not able to have the greatest impact on that. Just to quickly look at what happened in our CAG project last year. Obviously, we weren't able to do so many events, so we had less events, we had less volunteer hours, but from a resource waste prevention point of view, we saw a massive increase over a really difficult year, which is really encouraging to see and shows the role that communities can have. From a business perspective, and we talked about the whole food cycle melon story and the community there, but actually from a business point of view and going for gold, measuring that food waste is a really useful role and can be done more technically than just how many melons you hand out. And through Going for Gold, we did a pilot supporting organisations to measure their food waste. And it really helps to show what's arising, which department is it coming from, and what stage is that food appearing. And that enables the tailored interventions and drives better procurement decisions. And Bristol University saw how they were overproducing, over-procuring in certain areas, and were able to make significant changes. And trying to get people to engage with this. There's a lot of businesses out there who are not food related, don't associate themselves with a food problem. So trying to tell a story to make people realize why it has relevance to them was really interesting. And again, through Going for Gold, we talked to people about, well, imagine if all your staff had 2 cups of tea and a banana every day. What does that accumulate up to over a week? What does that look like over a year? If you put that across your whole city, how does that look? And kind of making the real relevance and showing you do have an impact. Everything that you buy does have a place within this whole issue. And we're working now with Genico to help their businesses who are recycling food to move up the food waste agenda, trying to link them up to other organisations so they can move their food recycling, reduce that and push them up the food waste hierarchy so that we're starting to reduce their consumption in the first place. And sometimes you need to just cut to the chase. We've got the Bristol Eating Better Awards in Bristol. If you want to get a market food trader license, you have to have a Bristol Eating Better Award, at least bronze, and that forces you to be looking at your food waste and your food procurement. So it's a really interesting way to drive action. And the dynamic procurement is obviously critical to get those small providers we've talked about in the community section to contribute into the wider procurement piece with the bigger organisations. And that builds that local food resilience and increased connection. And I'd like to echo what Claire said earlier, the anecdotal evidence from Going for Gold and the people we spoke to, the businesses who are engaged with sustainable practices, who pay the living wage, who are B Corps, who've made sustainable stance like Boston Tea Party or Icon Films, they've found they've got a decreased staff churn. The staff is significantly happier and they're much more productive. So actually these actions are not just about being ethical and being sustainable. They have a really interesting business case as well. So there are wider benefits to be gained. So that's a very rapid run through. Thank you very much for your time. And if you've got any questions, I'm very happy to answer them.
Well done, Sarah. I don't know how you managed to squeeze that in. It's such an interesting presentation, as are all of the presentations today. And I think we could run for another couple of hours, but we promised we only take 10 hours. But I think there's some brilliant points. And I think the last point around employment in particular is I'm hearing nothing but challenges in recruitment and in getting people back to work across not just the region, but across the country. And I think that, you know, we ought to be fearful that this isn't a nice to do, this is a need to do. If we're going to run our businesses efficiently and not have people that are hopping from job to job, you know, and particularly in the food sector where we're really challenged through Brexit, having limited immigrant workers now in the UK, there's a huge void here, and we need to be really careful that this doesn't give us problems. So thank you very much. Really interesting presentation. Well, we've just got a couple of minutes. We've had a couple of really good questions in the chat. Adam been very patient, but he's asked, how can we get involved in this in the middle of, can this complement us when we're seeking world trade deals for food and other things, which is a really interesting question. And as I just mentioned, you know, it seems that we have both carrot and stick, but perhaps if I go back to Claire, if you're still on, do you want to have a pop at that one to start with?
Sorry, Greg, I was busy typing and not.
So the question is basically from Adam is how, so in terms of living wage, in terms of our objectives to show and demonstrate more social value, how can this work when we're going to be under pressure potentially from future international trade deals?
Yes, I think that is obviously an issue. I've been listening to radio programmes about that recently, like Farming Today. There's obviously a lot of concern about the international trade situation. That's really something a bit beyond what I'm qualified to talk to, other than to say that, you know, whatever your market that you're in, it's always a good idea to pay your staff well, and you will reduce your HR all the evidence shows that you'll reduce your HR costs, related costs, you'll improve the happiness and productivity of your, well, that's anecdotal, but you should produce the increased productivity of the staff. You'll certainly reduce, evidence shows you'll reduce your sick leave and turnover. So you do, so there's a business bottom line, and there's more research being done on that by the Living Wage Foundation at the moment. They're updating their latest research on that, and that'll be on the Living Wage Foundation website.
Great. Okay, thank you. And perhaps just touching on a question from Catherine about how does social value fit in? Well, we had a previous event around social value, but you know, the fact is that the price at point of purchase is not the full price or value in buying a food product, and that's a message we've got to get across. I was just going to pass it across to Vicki just to comment on briefly, if that's okay. Vicki, do you want to have a little sort of comment on that?
Well, I'm not an expert, as I said in the chat, on the social value, but I think we should be pushing very much for local authorities and others purchasing to get clear steer and clearer guidance on how to use the social value in their purchasing, and to have but they have to have the budgets to be able to do that. Obviously, the big drive is to have lowest cost, you know, best value for money, but got to put the right values in there. So, you know, I as I said, I don't know much about it. I will look at that seminar you mentioned and look at how Sustain can be pushing that more, and work with local authorities. But we do have the added pressure of budgets being squeezed and everything like that, and the trade deals that will be pushing to get cheaper produce into the UK market without knowing the origins and quality and standards and wages. So right. big pressures ahead.
Great. Okay, thank you, Vicki. And I'm going to hurry along, but I can see on this event as well, we've got Priest Jenkins in from the Social Value Portal, who is an absolute expert in this world. So I encourage you to get in touch with those guys as well. So I'm going to move across on to our final speaker. Always gets the graveyard shift, which doesn't do justice to the amount of support that WECA do for businesses throughout the region and the amount of brilliant support they give to the Southwest Food Hub. So Sian, over to you to tell us about your stuff.
Thank you, and great to meet everyone. Essentially, it's a pleasure being here. It's a privilege and an honour to support the dynamic food procurement process, and we really look forward to that starting. So I'm from West of England Combined Authority Growth Hub. I also have sat on a regional recovery task force for food and rural to support regional recovery. So I'm just going to share my screen and just give you a bit of an insight into what we can do to support businesses. I know that there's some businesses on the line, but there's also some people that work for the councils and things. So let me just open this up and I'll just have a very quick whiz through and tell you about some of the support that we can provide for food and rural businesses. So we offer bespoke pivot support. So businesses obviously have had to diversify. So we've supported startups, scale-ups, established businesses, and we do support them to pivot their business. We support with Trading Better Online program, and we offer fully funded support for website development, social media, SEO, digital marketing strategy, entering new markets. We have supported with tech adoption, so food businesses that want to maybe pivot. So it might be having an outside food kiosk, for example, for social distancing. We offer accountancy support and have got links with the ICAEW. Workforce of the future. I know you mentioned workforce is really important. So we've got a program that supports with skills development, upskilling, apprenticeships, internships, traineeships, kickstart, job creation, and even virtual learning experience. We offer leadership and management programs, so mentoring, peer networking, redundancy support, addressing any kind of skills gaps. Financial support, we offer grants, so Green Business Grant, for example, is open for food businesses across the region. We offer innovation funding as well, and we've just recently closed a business growth grant to support businesses pivot. We offer international support, so for EU exit, strengthening networks. We've got also a close relationship with FoodWorks and can offer food technical support. And like I said, we're also a voice for food and rural businesses through the Food and Rural Sector Group. So if you are a business, or you do have any businesses within the Southwest region that need support, we're fully funded, and yeah, it'd be great to support you. That's it. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Sian. And you're also a accredited living wage provider as well, aren't you? Which was pointed out to me by Claire while you were presenting there. So brilliant, that's thanks. And obviously we've got the details and contact details for Sian and the West of England Combined Authority on this Southwest Food Hub website, so you can come to that. So I think we're just about gonna run out of time. We will make sure that you all have the contact details for future events, which we're putting together as we speak. If I can just still the microphone again, just to say that I think what's important and what's being surfaced here are some really, really important issues that it's important we reflect on how we can make change. I think it's really critical that we're patient. There's a lot to change, and we're changing things forever. So it will take time, it will take patience. And then I think, you know, we should all take responsibility to act and take little steps, and whether that's in how we buy and consume food at home, or whether we buy and consume food at work. So thank you very much for your involvement. It feels as if there might be another event in this for us. Here are our contact details on the screen, so please get in touch. And thanks to all our wonderful speakers. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.